What do you mean I gotta make room to download cross duels? You say he's hot, but he's not 3 gigabytes hot. Or is he? Anyway, let's see what I can get off this phone here. I could delete all the gacha games. I've already spent too much slurp juice getting my wonderful husbando, so that's out of the question. How about these social media apps? No, I've already committed to the brain poison, can't quit now. Hey, why do I have 99 voice messages from a Bumbles McFumbles? What in the world does this guy want?
Hey, Nova! Look, we both know you need someone to help you cover Metaphys. It's a nifty theme with a unique theme that, get this, banishes their own cards for effect. It's wild, right? Can you believe this? I read this in the newspaper today. They made another Wyrm deck that banishes their own cards. Seriously, are you sending my voicemails to Konami? Sword Soul is exactly what I came up with, all the way down to the anime swords. You know what would make this up to me, though? Metaphys, call me back. Okay, I get it. You're a busy guy. You got a lot of cardboard to eat, but you gotta take a break sometimes. And while your stomach is cooling off, we should talk about strange extra-dimensional dragons. Please, you gotta let me talk about my vanishing boys. You can't leave me hanging like this. No one loves how janky Metaphys Horus is more than me. Who else is gonna find a way to give it all its effects? Listen, we just need an in-archetype normal pendulum monster. I have strapped a bomb to every single piece of Deskbot support in the world. Give me the Metaphys video or I'm sending it off. All right, you called my bluff. I don't have a bomb or a new Deskbot support, but you should still give me the video.
Hello, it's me, John Konami. I have plenty of cards that can help you win the progression polls. All you gotta do is give Jack the Metaphys video. Call back, ha ha ha.
Man, I don't know. I kind of thought I'd think of a threat before I got to the voicemail, but lo and behold, I didn't. Let me call you back when I think of one. Okay, I thought of it. Give me the Metaphys video or I'll kill you.
Oh my god, does this guy ever give up?
Ha! I got you now! Now you're trapped in the most devious trap of all, an awkward phone call. And I'm not letting go until—
Is this about the Metaphys video?
I wasn't being too obvious, was I?
Fine, we can do it. But on one condition.
Name it!
Mega Man Battle Network episodes. You've slighted the net navies, and you will now learn to love them as I do.
Are you sure I can't just, drink a gallon of paint or something? At least they'd be better designed than half those knockoffs. Have you seen Pheroman.exe? He sucks!
Alright, you listen here, you 16-bit scumbag. Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and I suppose, since there's a gap in the new card release schedule, we should take a look at some of the Archetype backlog, and if it'll get someone to calm down, then all the better. Having its first card debut in the August 2014 core set Duelist Alliance, but not being fully realized until more than 3 years later in the October 2017 core set Circuit Break, Metaphys are another in a long line of themes that recontextualize iconic monsters into whole new forms. However, when this usually happens, we get a definitive light or dark version of those monsters, as shown in the Dark and Light Rays series. But here, something stranger might be going on, which we'll be exploring in just a bit. So let's crack open those philosophy books, trust me it'll make sense in a bit, examine how our extra-dimensional dragons dive deep into dangerous deeds, then see if there are any other multiversal travelers that can join in on our nostalgic voyage. Let's get metaphysical with Metaphys. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no better way to get there than on our Duel Runners. Our next stop is 40k, which means Leo and Luna Explained, where we'll be covering Ancient Fairy Dragons Companions, the Power Tool Dragons, Morphtronics, and any other cards that are more than meets the eye. We've also got a Discord where everyone's bullying me, calling me a nerd. I'm not a nerd! I also have a Twitch where you can join me for viewer duels, progression polls pulls, and chaos draft pulls for the foreseeable future. And don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with Metaphys? Well, they're a series of light attribute worm-type monsters that, for the most part, are reimaginings of famous monsters that are either dragons or dragon-adjacent. Mechanically, they benefit from being banished because many of them have an effect that triggers during the next standby phase after being banished, which involves shuffling them back into the deck so they can be used again. They also really appreciate being summoned by other Metaphys monsters, triggering or enabling more effects when you do. Layer enough of those together and you'll be able to stamp out your opponent's cards before running over them with gigantic monsters. As for what's going on in the lore, that's a bit trickier. Like I said previously, if this was the typical light versions of iconic monsters, then they'd be part of the Light Ray series. But here we have something that possibly has to do with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Multiverse. Executor, the only Metaphys not based on another monster, is some kind of giant fleshy tree from the waist down, with roots extending in countless directions into the stars until fading from view, with each branch housing what, on closer inspection, is a whole-ass universe. Or at least that's what the visual design seems to be implying. That means that this theory, in theory, makes for a great focal point for any Yu-Gi-Oh! Multiverse theory to rotate around, to say nothing of the insignia of the Metaphys and their horns looking very similar to the ones the Yang Zings have, who were in turn created by Constellar Sombre, who had super godlike powers and was associated with an archetype themed around stars, so there's a lot of power from a higher plane aesthetics going on here. And if I could spin this yarn a little longer, the name Metaphys is basically a shortened version of the word metaphysics, a field of philosophy that deals with analyzing the basic building blocks of the universe. This could imply that all the versions of the monsters we see here aren't alternatives, but rather are the base version, and all other forms, even the ones we assumed were the originals, are taken from this template. The card Draco Ascension muddies that water a bit, considering it's turning Dark Armed Dragon into Metaphys Armed Dragon, but a big trope that you see both in fiction and real-world philosophies is that you ascend to a higher plane by getting in touch with more natural aspects of the universe. So turning into what would be your original form might be seen as an ascension, even if it does mean you're turning from what seems like an upgraded version into an effectless normal monster.
Okay, enough rambling about card lore, let's get to the monsters! And while it's out of the usual level order, I feel like it's super important to start with Metaphys Ragnarok, a level 4 tuner monster with 1500 attack and 1000 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can banish the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you do, this card gains 300 attack for each Metaphys card banished by this effect. And when this card inflicts battle damage to the opponent, you can special summon a level 5 or higher Metaphys monster from your deck, but banish it during the end phase of your next turn, which would be a downside for most other decks, but is an absolute delight in ours. Ragnarok acts as a sort of Dante as we take Metaphys cards off the top of the deck, and it can possibly rack up a ton of advantage, but could also end up banishing a ton of off-theme tech cards that aren't quite as happy to be banished, so you'll have to build your deck accordingly. But hey, it's also a tuner, so now you have synchro access for what that's worth. This monster has a pretty neat suite of effects and abilities that really Ragnarok. Next is Metaphys Decoy Dragon, a level 2 pendulum monster with a scale of 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense, which means it has Karibo stats! As a pendulum spell, when your monster is targeted for an attack, you can target one of your Metaphys monsters that's either banished or in the graveyard, banish this card, and if you do, special summon the targeted monster in attack position. And as a monster, when any of your monsters are targeted for an attack, you can target one of your Metaphys monsters that's banished or in the graveyard, banish this card, and if you do, special summon that monster in attack position. And during the next standby phase of the turn after this card was banished, you can special summon this banished card. So like its original, Decoy Dragon is here to deter your opponent from going to combat, and it does a pretty good job of doing that, though any kind of effect removal bypasses that entirely. And then it just comes back during the next turn to reapply that restriction, because no matter what form it takes, it's always going to be annoying no matter how coy it acts. I'm gonna have to get used to this. But why in the world would there be a pendulum monster in this archetype, let alone just one that's a low scale and no high scale to go along with it? Well, that's so the theme can use another Metaphys monster that was released before the theme was solidified, Metaphys Horus, a level 6 synchro monster with 2300 attack and 1600 defense requiring generic material, and upon synchro summoning, activates a variety of effects depending on the non-tuner material used for this card's summon. If it's a normal monster, this face-up card is unaffected by other card effects this turn. If it's an effect monster, you can target one other face-up card on the field and negate its effects permanently, and if it was a pendulum, your opponent can choose a monster they control to give permanent control to you, but it can't attack this turn. So by tuning Ragnarok and Decoy Dragon, you actually get the negate and mind control effects. Unfortunately, this is not a scenario in which you can use a pendulum normal effect monster as material, but theoretically, you could use 2 non-tuners that fit the bill. Not that this theme supports that. All the monsters we're going to be talking about later are not viable synchro material for Horus, unless you use like 3 cost downs. But we do have a normal monster. For some reason. Metaphys Armed Dragon, a level 7 monster with 2800 attack and 1000 defense. Glad to see we're bringing in the version that inexplicably has Mega Monarch stats. This monster is usually visible despite its phantom existence. This flavor text is vague as hell and could mean any number of things, but I'm currently of the mind that it's because Metaphys Armed Dragon is sliding between dimensions. But that begs the question. Why the hell would you play this card in a Metaphys deck? I mean, it shows very much that this was the first card made without any regard for what the theme would be built into. It gains no benefits from being banished because it doesn't have an effect. It doesn't have a unique level or typing among the theme. It isn't even the strongest, and being a normal monster isn't really helpful for any effect. It's way too high for Horus. So I think the takeaway from this is don't use it unless you really want to tech in some Monarch cards into the theme. All in all, this card is not very Chaz out of 10,000. Metaphys Daedalus is a level 7 monster with 2600 attack and 1500 defense, and if this card is special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, you can banish all other face-up special summon monsters on the field. You might expect this to exclude on-themed cards, but Metaphys are into that kind of thing, and if this card is banished during the standby phase of the next turn, you can shuffle this banished card into the deck to banish a Metaphys card from your deck, except another copy of itself. This sets up another one of our cards, whether it be a monster for the next turn or another card with a more immediate effect. Its on-summon effect is also fantastic, as it's either going to fetch some negation to keep it from going off, or it'll wash away the opponent's board. Metaphys Nephthys is a level 8 monster with 2400 attack and 1600 defense, and if this card is special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, you can banish all set, spell, and trap cards on the field. And if this card is banished during the standby phase of the next turn, you can shuffle this banished card into your deck to add a Metaphys card from your deck to your hand. This makes the tongue twister Metaphys Nephthys absolutely integral to our game plan, because the more times we can banish it, the more we get to sculpt our hands to exactly what we need them to be. Its on-summon effect ain't half bad either, getting rid of counter traps and other cards that aren't as easy to activate at will. It will also force up any continuous traps your opponent may have so you know what you're up against. Once again though, it does hit your own cards, so you'll have to be very careful with how you utilize the effect. It also implies that Metaphys Nephthys is okay with floodgates, and that is a massive weight on your conscience. Metaphys Tyrant Dragon is a level 8 monster with 2900 attack and 2500 defense, and if this card is special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, it's unaffected by trap cards, and if this card attacks a monster, it can make a second attack in a row. And if this card is banished during the standby phase of the next turn, you can shuffle this banished card into the deck to special summon a Metaphys monster from hand, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. Out of our usual Metaphys, this is easily the best when it comes to offense, getting in 2 swings and shrugging off any battle trap. Suck it, Mirror Force! It also has, I would say, the worst banished effect. If it's summoned from deck, that'd be a completely different story, but that's currently Ragnarok's job. As it is now, Tyrant can completely whiff for no value, which is kind of lame, but hey, I'll take that over its previous form any day of the week. Do you remember when you had to tribute dragons whenever you wanted to special summon it from the grave? It sucked! That leaves us with our last monster, the big bungler themselves, Metaphys Executor. A level 10 monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense that can't be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned from the hand by banishing 5 Metaphys cards with different names from your hand and or face up on the field. It can't be destroyed or banished by card effects, and once per turn, if your opponent controls more cards than you do, you can target one of your banished Metaphys monsters and special summon it, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. This card is... I wish I could say it's not bad, but it's just not good. Sure, its stat line is great and effect is very useful for swarming your field, but its summoning condition is absolutely horrendous. True, it can banish Metaphys cards, not just monsters, but currently the theme only has 11 other cards, and while we generally want our cards to be banished, we'll be doing our best to do so before we have to resort to banishing so many to get Executor online. Heck, even letting you use multiple copies of the same card would have been some nice leniency, but we have no such luck. Maybe one day we'll get an expansion to the theme that adds more names to the roster to make it easier to summon, but as it stands, it's pretty tough to execute.
Alright, that's all the monsters. Now it's time for the spells and traps. But before we move on, if any of you out there think we're going to talk about metaphysical regeneration, think again, because A psychic support card doesn't have anything to do with a Wyrm deck, and B, they eroded that to be supernatural regeneration instead, to keep in line with its original name, and also so you can banish it for Executor, I guess. Anyway, let's begin by talking about Asa Metaphys, a continuous spell card that, once per turn, lets you banish a Metaphys card from your hand, and if you do, you draw a card. And once per turn, if your Metaphys card in its owner's possession is banished, you apply the following effect based on whose turn it is. If it's yours, all monsters on the field, except Metaphys ones, lose 500 attack and defense. And if it's during your opponent's turn, you change the battle position of all monsters on the field, except Metaphys Monsters. That one's a bit easier for your opponent to work around, since you can summon monsters in a less advantageous position before the mandatory banish goes off. Or you just make link monsters, that's way easier. But the stat debuff is a lot harder to deal with. Our big monsters already have some pretty juicy stats, but they aren't uncontested. However, on your turn, Asa Metaphys can make you the top dog while cycling you a new card and setting up Metaphys effects. It's as simple as that. Metaphys Factor is a field spell card, and each turn, a level 5 or higher Metaphys monster you normal summon can be summoned without tributing, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. And your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to your Metaphys monster's effects activations. This is incredible because not only does this push your effects through hand traps and other forms of interaction, it also makes Metaphys Nephthys better because your opponent can't start flipping back row to avoid getting banished. It also makes you less reliant on a lucky Ragnarok mill or waiting a turn for your Metaphyses to begin cycling, because now you can just normal summon them out of the hand, no problem, all while still setting up the cycle. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this card will be a major factor in your victories. Metaphys Ascension is a normal trap card that discards a Metaphys card so you can draw a card, then you can banish a Metaphys monster from your deck, acting as another way to jumpstart your plays while setting up more Metaphys cards for Executor Summon. And if this card is banished, you can add any Metaphys card from your deck to your hand, except another copy of itself. But you can only use one effect of this card per turn, and only once per turn. So this is kinda like a more short-lived version of Asa Metaphys, and it's nice to have another card that likes to be banished so Ragnarok has more chances to shine. And also, because it's a normal trap card, can be banished as part of Trap Tricks' effect. This, of course, means you won't be able to activate the copy you just set, but it will trigger the search of the banished one to fix up your hand, and then you'll get to use the freshly set copy next turn. It's a bit frustrating having to deal with all these exclusive once per turns, but learning how to use them effectively is the trick. Metaphys Dimension is a continuous trap card, and if your opponent special summons a monster, except during the damage step, you can target one of your banished Metaphys monsters and special summon it, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. And if your other Metaphys card in its owner's possession is banished while this card is already face up in the spell and trap zone, you can target a card your opponent controls and banish it. So this thing has Executor Summon effect, it's just predicated on your opponent special summoning, something that everyone is doing all the time anyways. And it rewards you for banishing your Metaphys cards by banishing your opponent's cards, which is actually pretty sick. It's a shame this card has a ton of hard once per turns, because otherwise this would be a menace of a control card. But as it stands now, you won't want to run too many for fear of bricking. But I'm sure there's some dimension out there where this is better. Okay, that's all the Metaphys cards, but what do we do with them? Well, we're gonna want to use big, flashy effects to rip our opponent's field apart, then swoop in with gigantic monsters to steal the game. But since our effects are on a turn delay, we'll need ways to banish the right monsters quickly and easily while stalling our opponent until it's too late. But what can we play to help them out? Well, a card I feel obligated to mention is Dracoscension, a continuous spell card that came out at the same time as Metaphys Armed Dragon, and well, basically it's that card's missing effect. However, this only really works with Metaphys proper if you had another dragon theme that liked being banished that had complementary levels. As for our banishing vectors, we actually have a ton of really good ones to add in. Aloof Lupine saw a ton of play in Thunder Dragons for its ability to banish a card out of your hand and deck to turbocharge your plays, and it works similar wonders here. Heck, if you wanted to add some explosivity to your plays, teching in some Thunder Dragons is a great way to do so, even if it does lead to some very bricky hands. Gold Sarcophagus is a great way to get any of your banished effects online, but because of said Thunder Dragons, it's now resting on the limited list. However, we have a very fine substitute in Cross Out Designator. See, there's a lot of decks that love banishing their cards and would love to use a card like this, but since it negates the effects of both players who want to use a card with that name, you can't just banish Sword Soul traps for tokens or Thunder Dragon monsters for value, as they trigger immediately after being banished. But because it only negates for the turn it's used, and the Metaphys effects trigger on the following standby phase, this counter card can actually be used as a starter. Just set this on your opponent's turn, Wait to see if you can use Crossy to stop a powerful generic staple, and if not, just flip it, calling any Metaphys you want, banish it, then reap the benefits next turn. Another horrifying card we could use is Necroface. You know how Tearlaments are waiting for the exchange of spirit cards to open up their milling capabilities to ramp up their power? Well, Necroface is that for Metaphys, banishing even more cards off the top, kinda like having another Ragnarok trigger. And because it's not once per turn, if you hit a Necroface along the way, you can trigger it all over again. And since it hits your opponent's deck as well, it's a great way to randomly strip them of powerful cards. Like I mentioned earlier, Trap Trick is a great card, but have you ever wanted the effect of Ascension without having to wait to activate a trap card? Well, that's where Proofiness, the tactical trapper, comes in. If normal or special summoned, it banishes a trap card from your deck, which effectively makes this a Stratos for the theme. It can even banish traps from your grave, so if you don't have any more Ascensions in deck, you can just bop one out of your grave for the same effect. And if it's destroyed, you get to reset a banished normal trap card, but you're probably better off just using this as material for another summon after its job is done, though the replacement effect is a nice cherry on top. Waterfall of Dragon Souls is another pretty neat normal trap card that acts as a searcher for any Wyrm, or cashes out any number of Wyrms from your hand or face-up field to draw you cards. Now, that last one only works if you can send the monsters to the grave, so if macro is up, you'll have to utilize the other effect. But if not, you can cycle through a ton of cards to set up your plays, and who knows, you might end up setting up and or drawing into Executor all at the same time. Oh, and while we're on the subject, yes, you probably want to be playing Dimensional Fissure, Macrocosmos, and Dimension Shifter, that last one being a great hand trap to set the whole banishing cycle up on your opponent's turn if you go second. You might also find some success splashing this card with Sword Soul. It's already a really powerful engine as is, so you might end up getting a worse Sword Soul deck rather than a better Metaphys deck, but the synergies are there. Taya and Grandmaster love banishing cards, not to mention the Sovereign loves seeing things be banished, so the two themes have a mutual hobby. Heck, even just adding Long Yuans for easy Barona access gives you destruction and negation, things this theme sorely needs. As for a silly tech pick, try Burial from the Different Dimension. Speaking of setting up Executor, this Burial can take up to 3 of your banished Metaphys and slap them right back into your grave. And that makes 60% of what you need right there. You can also put Necroface back into your grave to facilitate any Chaos monsters you want to summon, at which point Necroface will trigger, doing the whole banishing cycle all over again. And that's all I have to say about Metaphys. They're inconsistent, but no one can accuse them of being ineffectual. Really, the theme is crying out for another big wave of support so they can, at the bare minimum, just get enough Metaphys names for other effects, or it needs another shell that hasn't already been embraced by the soft and tender embrace of Tenyies. Still, I think this deck has the potential to steal games out of nowhere, and really, what better way to solidify the power of puns than to make a Metaphys deck that can take on the meta? Alright, that covers that. How'd you like it?
I don't know. You could have dragged out the lore section a lot more. I feel like at this point, at least some people will actually still be interested in watching the rest of the video.
Yeah, sure, whatever. And what about your end of the bargain?
Oh, the Mega Man thing. Yeah, I figured if I was gonna subject myself to torture, I should go all in. So I looked online for a few copies and came across a reseller called the Knights of Hanoi. Really stellar folks, you can barely smell all the chloroform they use. They even replaced the label for me. Some jerk who owned it before them put Ignis on it, but they got a real sticker on there in no time. Talk about service.
Okay, well, while I let Bumbles know how much of a bad idea it is to dabble in that particular can of worms, oh, and by the way, moment of sincerity, please go and subscribe to Bumbles McFumbles. They have a plethora of videos about video gaming, from the big to the small, from the established franchises to strange peripheral services. I know a lot more about GameFly now than I might have known otherwise without his influence. They never fail to make my day whenever they show up on my subscription feed, and has been incredible to work with in all the projects they've been a part of. What was I talking about? Anyway, if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was sponsored by my lovely patrons, including Quasar Commander Harry, the ominous benefactor, special contributor Gibbles the Gibble, Nebula Navigators 3rd Dynasty, Adam Zajdel, Ashling Waltz, Avi Chali, Benjamin Meisner, Kane Senpai, Cameron Berg, Eric, Frankie, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba331, Great Big Pillock, Howling Zangetsu, Ironic, John Manji, Julius Sneezer, Larakia, Meteornus, Michael Madsen, Mighty Action X, Muzuki Clark, Neo Trinity, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Rem T. Bright, RJ the Jank Monarch, Ruxith Serrani, Sophie, apparently, The Fresh Prince of Conair, The Wizard Moose, True Neutral, Tyler Cranston, Xander Wolfensberger and Zyrus, Cosmic Crusaders, Bear Sharktopus Studios, Chaz Ghost, Corbynisms, Emily, Eva Padilla, Inblink, Jesus Garcia, KL, Kale the Dragon, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-De-Doo, Manga Pages, Marion James E. Picata, Nitromo, RGS, Shooting Star 3300, Star-Lord 777, and the Legendary Raven, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. I'm only able to continue doing this thanks to the support of these lovely people, so if you'd like to be a part of these credits, as well as help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, please check out my YouTube membership or Patreon links in the description to see if I have anything you'd like on offer. And if you'd like to see another video that Bumbles has helped out on, check out this video on the history of the Dual Terminal. It really shows his voice acting chops. And as for my favorite Bumbles video, check out this 100% real documentary about points and how they affect the universe. Don't let the Tony Hawk thumbnail fool you. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.